one we're doing about families, and Carol was kind enough to be our first person. Carol Gannon is a war baby, she said. So most of her childhood was in the 40s, spent living with her aunt, uncle, grandmother, and mother at the 303 and Substation Farm. But during my early and later teen years, my mother, grandmother, and she lived in a small house that Grandpa owned next to the Butt-Off farm on 42, which is now what is RPM. She graduated from Brunswick High School in 1963, attended Dyke College, obtaining a private secretarial diploma. In 1967, she took a secretarial position with a patent attorney in Cleveland and lived in Lakewood. In 1971, the law firm for which she worked moved to Beechwood. She moved back to the country in Troy Township in Geauga County. She left that job in 1976. Later, she took a position with Stock Equipment Company in Bainbridge and was there for 22 years as secretary, personnel, HR assistant, and payroll administrator. She married her husband, Pat, in 1973, and besides her original 20 acres in Troy Township, they eventually bought a couple adjoining properties, ending up with 53 acres, because they both enjoyed nature and photography and had trails through the fields and woods. We didn't have children, but I've always had cats, and for a while had a flock of heritage breed chickens. Pat passed away in 2017, and in 2018 we were lucky enough that she moved back to Brunswick to be near her cousins. Carol.
Okay, hi. I'm not a public speaker. I've really never done this, so hopefully I'll make this fairly interesting for you. I'm sorry, I do need this. I can't stand for long periods of time. First of all, I've got four people from the Keller clan here tonight. I've got my cousin Christine Keller, her brother Roger Keller, and my cousin Diane Keller Davis, and her daughter Caitlin. Okay, so I'll give a bit of information about the Keller and Fries families first. Walt Wozniak gave a very interesting presentation a couple of years ago on the Fries home on 303. The information I gathered came from my grandmother, Hazel Melina Benbow Morton, Ancestry.com, and 7 local history books. There's several history books from, so one is a 1901 version. I don't think I can. And some Brunswick ones, including one by Sam. Abraham Fries surveyed the western half of Brunswick around 1800. In 1817, he and his sons John and Bill Williams and their wives came from New England and located on land at the corner of Grafton and what's now Substation Road. Abraham Fries taught school and was also the Medina County Surveyor from 1838 to 1845. Bill Williams' son, Bill Williams Jr., married Trifina Tillotson, which I believe is another old area name. One of their children was Henry Fries, who married Mary Bennett, and one of their children was Bertha Bernice, who married Albert Keller. The Keller story starts in Germany, where John Jacob Kelly was a Burgermeister, which I had to Google that. It's kind of like a mayor, basically. His son David and wife emigrated to the U.S. and came to Valley City in 1832. Their son Martin married Christine Weaver, who had a son named Frederick. He married Catherine Barth, and they had 9 children. And some of you may know these names: Albert, Joe, Harley, Royal, Fred, Irene, Hogue, Rose, Fenn, Velma Tibbetts, and Ella. They had a farm on Substation, which I understand later became the Nura Farm. Irene and Tom Hogue had a restaurant bar next to the town hall, and Tom drove a school bus for many years. He was one of my drivers, along with Bob and Don Hazlett, if any of you knew them. Fred Keller and wife Eva and their family lived on 303 east of substation. Harley and his family was on the west side of Pearl, between Grafton and 303. Albert Keller, known as Bert, married Bertha Bernice Fries in 1913. They had a farm on Grafton Road, down the hill some west of Pearl Road. Their children were Forrest and Bessie, and probably many of you knew Forrest. Forrest married Hazel Eileen Morton, and hence there's my connection with the Kellers. And, excuse me, they had twin sons, Roger and Richard. Christine and Roger Jr. Their children was Ronna Smith, and then Richard married Kate Purcell, and they had 3 children, Richard Jr., Diane, who's here, and Deborah. And they all have grown families now, although only Diane is here in Brunswick. Now to my family. After I get some water, I'll get dried out here. Okay, I'll start with the Benbows, who traveled to the U.S. with the Clements. Settling in the Strongsville corner of what became known as Bennett's Corners, the families of John Benbow, Richard Clement, and William Bedford came from England together about 1834. Eventually named Benbow Road, the road where they all bought farms was originally called Friendship Street.
What was it? Friendship Street. Friendship Street.
Named because the 3 families had come over together and all settled on that road. That's according to the one Strongsville history that I've got. John Benbow married Eliza Craddock in 1844 in Strongsville. Her family came from England sometime between 1839 and 1842. John and Eliza had 3 children who lived to adulthood, Charles, Mary, and William. Charles became a partner of Charles Clark, operating a general store in Strongsville called Benbow and Clark. Mary Benbow married Marcus Warner, and they lived on Pearl Road. I have a copy of John Benbow's obituary in 1894 with the very flowery language they used, and it's on one of these copies that I have up here with the photographs. John and Eliza's son, William Benbow, married Alice Carpenter. This gets confusing. Alice died in 1878, and in 1881 he married her sister, Annie Luella Carpenter. The Carpenter sisters were daughters of Horace Carpenter of Brunswick. Annie Luella had a daughter, Ethel, by a first marriage, and William adopted her as well as an unrelated boy named Bill Woods Benbow. William and Luella had one daughter named Hazel Helena Benbow, and she was my grandmother. She married William O. Morton of Brunswick, and eventually they lived on her parents' farm on Pearl Road, south of Kingsbury, eventually buying it.
Carol, would it be easier if I read it do for your voice?
Yeah, I practiced read this yesterday. I got through 4 pages before I started losing my voice.
I'm just worried about your throat.
Okay, right here.
Okay.
There's
a photograph in the Strongsville book, too, of the original Benbow house on Benbow Road. It's still there, but I believe all the Clement homes shown in that book are now gone. The Benbows and Clements are almost all buried at Bennett's Corner Cemetery, as are most of the Mortons. At least some of the Carpenters are at Westview Cemetery. The Strongsville history says Richard Clement and family came from Wantage, England, about 1834. His wife was Anna Tompkins of Abingdon, England, and they had 10 children. 3 of their sons, William Richard Jr. and Edward, settled in or near Strongsville. William married Harriet Phelps, or Phillips, and their children were Fanny, or Fairy, Taylor, Carolyn McNutt, Grace, never married, William Alford, James Edward, Amy Ellen married Marcus Omni Morton. I know that. More about them later. Richard Jr. married Mary Meacher, and Edward married Sophia Redrup. Many of their children and grandchildren stayed in the area, including in Brunswick. The Carpenter family, the first of the Brunswick area carpenters, came to America on the ship Bevis, B-E-V-I-S.
I always pronounce it Bevis, but
Bevis.
who knows?
In 1638 and joined the Plymouth colony. At some point, the descendants moved to Vermont, from which they came to Ohio. In 1818, Josiah Carpenter and sons Zachary and Caleb, along with the E. Lyon and J.S. Strong families, made the journey to Strongsville, at first settling in that town. Josiah returned to Vermont, coming back with his wife Lois Bullock and the rest of his family. During that time, Zachary and Caleb cleared land for crops and a cabin. Zachary married Maria Bennett. More about them later. Another son of Joseph and Lois was Rufus, who married Elzina Brooks. I love some of these names.
Yeah.
Elzina Brooks. They bought a farm in Brunswick on what became Carpenter Road. One of their children was Horace, who also bought a farm on Carpenter Road. Horace married Julia Ann Maxfield from Boston. Their children were Annie Luella, Carol's great-grandmother, Alice Rosella Rufus, Jewett, Newton P., Wilbur Watson, Martha Francis, Gertie Isabel, and Edwin Furman. Julia left Horace on December 31st, 1879, and they eventually divorced. Whoa. Okay. Julia went to Salt Lake City, where she died in 1900.
I'm guessing she became a Mormon.
Could be. In 1881, Horace married Emma Eliza Livingston, and they had one daughter, Ella. Annie Luella married James Cadnam, but they were divorced after 2 children. What is that?
I know. Four generations in a row, there's a divorce somewhere.
Ooh. Earl, who died young and Ethel. In 1881, Annie then married William Benbow. After his first wife and Annie's sister Alice Rosella died in 1878. William adopted Ethel as his own daughter. She has 2 newspaper clippings regarding the Carpenter family reunions in Cleveland and Berea. At the one in 1899, Horace Carpenter was elected president for the following year. She has articles of the copies with her.
Yeah, there's a big long one over there.
According to several sources, the first of the Brunswick area Morton ancestors came to America on the ship Anne in 1623, not the Mayflower.
Which I think sometimes some things say.
Gotcha. And joined the Plymouth colony. In 1684, our branch moved to Hatfield and then Whately, Maine. Massachusetts, MA. In 1838, Omni Morton, a stonemason, moved to Ohio, settling on the south side of Grafton Road near what is called 130th. And there's a newspaper article about a Morton's child gravestone found on that farm in the 1950s. Omni married Selecta Carpenter, daughter of Zachary and Maria Bennett Carpenter.
There's carpenters all through all of this genealogy. They were a very prolific lot.
There you go. Omni and Selecta had 5 children, including Marcus Omri, who married Amy Ellen Clement, mentioned above. Amy was a twin, and I found reference to twins in one of the earlier Clement generations. Then 2 generations later, my twin cousins were born, so twins obviously ran in that family. Marcus and Amy had 7 children: Bessie, Charles Ball, Allison Clement. Are those his?
Bessie married Alice Ball.
Okay.
First.
Okay.
After his death, she married Allison Clement.
Okay.
Who was actually her cousin, but they were old enough then that it didn't.
They were going to have children, right? Ione Ellen married John Beisch. Okay. William Omri married Hazel Benbow. Clement Wade married Marjorie Killian. Jenny H. Edward married Edward Boehner. There's another Strongsville name. Yeah. Vivian Earl Mike married Gladys Fuller. And Mary S. married Samuel Rogers. Marcus taught at Hinckley, Brunswick, Strongsville, and North Royalton schools at various times and was superintendent at Hinckley for a while. See son William's diploma copy that she brought.
Yeah, the reason, this is William
Wow.
Legally, but Omri Morgan signed it as Marcus Morgan signed it as the superintendent. So, it was
She has so many cool things.
the original diploma is like this. And I got that introduced and I gave the original to the Hinkley Historical Society. I didn't want that great.
Okay, let's see, where are we? Here.
Yeah.
William Omri married Hazel Helena Benbow. Well, here we go again. My goodness, it just goes round and round. That whole Bennett's Corners area was really packed. They had 3 daughters, Flora, Ethel, Hazel Irene, and Maud Catherine, who graduated from Brunswick High School in 1928, 1933, and 1940, respectively. Flora married John Roush, and they made their home on the northwest corner of 303 and Substation, and there's more about that later. Hazel married Forrest Keller, and they had twin sons, Roger and Richard, as mentioned before. Maud married Stuart Hack from Medina, and they had 1 daughter, Carol. They divorced in 1950, and Maud eventually married Paul Tucker from Lodi. Flora and Maud both kept all or most of their school memorabilia, and much of it will be included in the school display when it's completed. It's going to be so cool. During much of her childhood, Carol said, she lived on the farm on Substation in 303. The interurban ran through Brunswick from 1903 into 1931. I was told the Draghi family stabled horses for folks while riding on the interurban. The substation was across the road from that farm. You have a picture?
Well, I have all of the albums.
Oh, there's the album. Okay.
But you're going to get to this part of it.
Okay. One of the fascinating things to me about the farm, and this is fascinating, is that it's graduated size 4-seater outhouse. I remember using that outhouse even after we got a real bathroom in the house in the mid-50s. There's 4 different sizes. There's little
Mama Bear,
Mama Bear, baby.
and I graduated up 3 of them.
Though I never thought to ask about it, I presume it was built to accommodate the livery customers. I brought a picture of that seat as well as a small album of other houses of other farm buildings. Too bad most of those buildings are gone now. Even the house is slated for demolition.
I was just told tonight it's gone. It's been heavily torn down this last week.
Torn down.
Oh, not Florida, John's house.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry. No,
No.
the one that Grandpa was born in over
Oh,
on.
on Grafton.
And
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Because the one that's
Wrong.
substation is
Yeah.
slated to get torn down.
Yeah.
You can look at various photos and copies of newspaper articles and a few very old obituaries she brought with me. She has an annotated post-it notes with names for the properties she's mentioned and put them on the big 1874 map, which shows property owners back then.
So Omri Morton and Horace Carpenter and Rufus Carpenter are all on here, as well as the Freeze. And then some of the others, I just put where people live.
This was the property that's now the RPM down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as it goes south into Medina, and Carol's got any number of things that she's already donated to us for the school building and some of your aunt, right? Your aunt Flora Morton. And so we have lots of really, really wonderful things that will be on display thanks to Carol.
She even had the script to her senior high school play.
I mean, it just, the class ring, which I'm not putting anywhere where it can be taken until I have a secure place for it, until we have a secure place for it. So it's time for people to ask you questions. You want to talk some more about some of the other?
I think I probably bored them long enough. I was supposed to have had 6 of these, and somehow we're missing 1 or 2. But if you want, anybody that wants some more detail, I can always email my work files to you. Each one is usually about 2 pages long. But I don't know, like the Draghi and Roush or the Carpenter family, the Morton family.
I mean, it's amazing that she's related to all of the things. We always talk at the Historical Society about the road names. Because why is it Keller and Hannah? You know, obviously there was a Keller and a Hannah that lived on that road. You know, it's the miners.
I saw one thing that it was, I forget his first name, but there was a Keller that lived at 42, and the road went from his property down to Hancock, where there was a Hannah family.
See, so, I mean, how else would you name them, right? Makes sense. So,
Well, if your family's been one unit for 200 years, you're gonna be related to a lot of people.
well, yeah, and as we go through our family histories, now Nola's here, she'll be here with the Benjamin family, and Carol's here to be, and Ron for the Chitsey family. And so we're going to try to do this regularly so that we can learn more about the actual people who settled here rather than just statistics. And, you know, I mean, you can look at maps, but it doesn't, who knew that they got divorced? I didn't know that.
Yeah, way back then, yeah.
So, questions for Carol?
Horace wrote some scathing things about his wife when she left him. They were in his Bible, which I wish the Historical Society had, and then they got crossed out. But you should kind of read it, and I've got a copy of that at home. But, oh, he was...
I guess he was ticked off. It's not too different from the way it is today. It was so much, you'd think it was pretty rare back then, but
Yeah, I think
I
it
guess
was.
not. There's
So your maiden name was Morton, correct?
My maiden name was Hack. My mother's maiden name was Morton.
Okay, so you're Carol Hack in the yearbook that I have at home.
Yeah.
okay. There's another family that's been around a long time, so,
Which,
No, we haven't been here too long.
well, the 50s.
60-some years
Yeah.
ago, not like any of you guys.
No, not like 200 years
No,
ago.
so what year did you graduate?
62,
Okay, year before me.
right.
And who's the Chitsey that's here?
Here's a question over here.
I was going to say, I was in 4-H with Sally, and her mom was our advisor. Huh?
I never would have done that.
Yeah.
There's a question from over here.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning. So all the families you talked about, those are families that you're related to?
Either I'm personally related to by blood or by marriage. The Swedes and the Keller families are by marriage.
Okay.
All the rest of them, yeah, I've got their
Morton's,
DNA
Carpenter's,
somewhere.
Benbows.
And can you share so when you were younger, you lived on a farm before you lived from Brunswick? Can you talk about life here when you grew up in Brunswick?
I can remember the very first housing development built on Sleepy Hollow Road. When I think I was in first grade.
Okay.
Samuel.
When I was in first grade, there were 2 classes of about 30 students each. And there were a total of 5 school buses for the whole town. And I remember number 6 being a brand new bus about the time I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. By the time I graduated high school, there were 107 in my class. The next year was just a few more, and then it went up to over 300 as the baby boomers started, okay? Because, as I say, I'm a war baby, so there weren't as many kids to conceive when the men were all across elsewhere.
Walt had a question?
I remember John in Florida. I remember going in their house. She had that house so impeccable clean. When you walked in there, you smelled bleach. I mean, this is spotless. I mean, and she had a hard time getting around. She was so heavy set, and but what a lady. And John Roush, he worked at DHL.
Yeah,
And
and so did Uncle Forrest. They both worked on that, and Roger and Richard both worked there for a while,
correct.
too.
And I remember Forrest Keller told me that BHL stands for Brunswick, Liverpool, and
Brunswick, Hinckley, and
Hinckley and
Liverpool.
Liverpool. And I knew that, and I told him that, and Forrest says, no, it's bums,
Hobos?
hobos,
Hobos?
hobos and liars. I never forgot that.
Sounds like Uncle John. He was a character.
I think the fact that they had a four-seater.
We have a question.
Toilet, yeah, no?
Hi, I have three questions. When did you go to school, Brunswick?
I graduated in '63. So from 1950 through, I started first grade in 50.
Okay.
Or 51.
And, how's Leland Keller fit into this whole deal?
Leland is Harley's son, and Harley was one of Bert Keller's brothers, so
Okay.
cousins to this group.
Okay. Is Sherry here?
I knew Sherry in school. I haven't seen her since I was in high school.
She's around. I mean,
And they're, or Keller. Keller.
Sherry.
They go around, it's, I think one of the Kellers still lives there, and then there's a
Well, Joe-
or something there now. Lee lives there, yeah, okay.
And Jody, your daughter's around. Okay, Gladys Morton, how's that fit in?
Gladys Morton married Vivian Morton. She was a Fuller,
Yeah, okay.
another old family in town. She married Vivian Morton, who was brother to my grandfather.
Okay.
And when I did the stories in 1976, Gladys was the one who had Omri Morton's handwritten, beautiful script, handwritten books and stories, and there was a general store because she had a ledger from a general store, and every single little thing, and everything was like a pound of flour for 2 cents, and we have all of those, many of those things at the Historical Society. Once we can get it spread out and people could see it, and once we can start to get it digitized, then people can access some of that online, make it easier for people to see how it looked. I mean, it's really fascinating. The cemeteries that you talked about, we have all of the records from the Bennett's Corner Cemetery. I don't know how we got to, but we do.
I had to call the city of Brunswick to find out where the different graves were. I did check, and I had Chris over there, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, we've got who paid for them in advance.
Neat.
I mean, all kinds of neat stuff like that. You know, we have an original layout of Westview Cemetery. Just don't have any place to put it to show it. So as soon as we
Oh, that's good to
can
know.
spread out, we'll be able to do that. But I'd see some other old families around. Now, Carl probably worked for every one of them. But, I mean, I've never met anybody Carl didn't work for.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. And I truly love old Brunswick. And one of the great things about it was the families that were here were families to everyone. Growing up on Minor Drive, I just turned 82. I don't know how the hell that happened. I've been around for a while. But I worked with Roger and Richard on their grandpa's farm on Grafton Road. I remember Richard would always go from his dad's house there on
Kimmy.
And instead of going down Pearl and down Grafton, and I would ride with him, we'd always go south and down 303 and the big substation and up.
I'll tell you why.
Right.
Because Aunt Hazel used to take things over to the farm when they were working out in the fields, you know, a picnic lunch or whatever. And she got rear-ended at Grafton
Oh,
on Pearl one time, and she never ever went in that direction again. And I think the twins were with her. And nobody was hurt, except for the car. But from then on,
They never went that way again.
around the block.
Okay.
but working on that farm, and we worked from sun up to sundown, and we got lunch, and it was $1 a day.
Big paycheck.
I
You're
remember.
probably glad to get it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember up the street here, about where the bank is, there was a lady had a strawberry farm. And I used to hoe strawberries for her at 10 cents an hour.
Hey, Myra.
Yeah, big time, big spenders. But you think about what it was like when the newspaper started in Brunswick, and we were the first offset newspaper in Ohio, and it was Gow Printing that owned it, Neil Gow, and it was 1959. I made 95 cents an hour. That was big money back then. And when they needed a reporter, and they asked me if I wanted to try it, the fact that I could make $10 a meeting was like, oh my God, I'm rich.
As far as the family aspect, I can remember the people that were close back then. Forrest was like a father to me, and I used to go down to BHL, and he'd let me steam clean my car and stuff. But everybody was part of the family, no matter what your last name was. They all treated you the same.
Small towns are like that, because everybody knows everybody, and half of them are related.
Maud Edwards, when we first moved here, you had to go into she was the principal of Brunswick, and you'd go into the office, and my parents were there, and Maud said, well, I just want to tell you one thing. Everybody in this community is related to somebody. So you never say nothing bad about anybody. And she was right.
How is it that you remember the bus driver, Tom, did you say Tom? Was he your bus driver?
He was one of my bus drivers.
Was the route substation there where he might have let you off? Yes, because I believe he was my bus driver in elementary school.
Okay.
Also, and the route was from the old elementary school down 42, down Boston, down substation, and then back up 303. So I was just wondering if that was...
Yeah, that sounds about right. The routes vary from year to year, so
Sure.
I can remember some years we were on Marks Road and substation, some years it was Boston, Grafton, and then some kids, when we lived on 42, down some of the other roads, so.
If that is the bus driver, I recall the highlight of riding the bus, and maybe this was on the other buses too, was that you got to stand in front. You can imagine what this would go over today, but you got to stand in front of the bus and manually open the door for the exiting students.
Yeah, I don't think so. Roger, you got, no? Come on. You gotta have a Keller story.
Give me some time, I'll think of one.
Okay.
You know, as far as stories, that's the one thing I don't remember my family doing was telling stories. They mentioned people, talk about people they've seen in the current histories of people, but way back, no. But two things I remember, and I have no idea if these are family or just people they knew of or had heard of. One was a lady was in her cabin, and some Indians came to the door and asked to be fed, and she fed them, and they went away, and it was no problem, but it was
Scary.
a really scary thing. Another was that a woman in her cabin, in her yard, shot a mountain lion out of a tree in her yard. Okay.
A question. There's a Keller, Paul Keller, Paul and Gus Keller.
Yes.
My dad worked for Paul Keller, and Paul lived originally on Grafton, not Grafton, on March Road.
Yeah.
It was.
Well,
And they
he
eventually moved to Valley City, and Paul passed away a few years back, but he was 98, 99.
Well, Beth died a few
Just
years
died,
later.
yeah.
She was over 100.
Yeah. But my dad worked for Paul when he first, not when we first moved to Brunswick, but only a year or two after.
If you don't know, that's a beaching over there.
And he worked for Paul in 59. Paul got lung cancer and had to have a lung removed. He couldn't work, so my dad went to work for Ken Cleveland. They worked for him until they retired.
The interesting thing
So
there
Paul
is
was
that
related to the same Kellers?
that was the thing. Paul Keller married Bessie Keller, and supposedly they weren't at all related.
Paul Keller was from Valley City.
The Valley
That he
City
was-
Keller, and I'm sure there was a connection back
Oh, yeah.
because the Kellers did first settle in Valley City, but they weren't aware that there was any relationship.
Isn't it strange that Valley City had the biggest population of German families, but we're called Brunswick, which is a German name.
There's
but
quite
it-
a German names in Brunswick too.
Well, I know, but I mean,
Yeah.
Valley City, I mean, Liverpool was inundated with the German.
I thought it was interesting that my mother's generation, my mother and both of my aunts married men of German background. Yeah.
Clyde Freeze told me that the west side of Brunswick was the German side. The east side of Brunswick was the English side. Pitseys,
Right.
Fullers, Carpenters.
Oh, right,
If
yeah,
you
when you
look
think
at
about
it, it's
it.
like divided in half.
Pearl Road was the border.
A little bit.
Well, I suppose maybe they knew each other, you know, and they said, well, come, you know, this is a good place to raise potatoes, or whatever, you know, so.
But they spoke German, you know, because of the Valley City connection and Brunswick, they spoke German over there too. And he said, Clyde told me, he said there was a lot of German spoken back there.
Well, the church, BB Town, in the 50s and 60s still had a German service, a German language service.
I made this out too for the brick.
You were talking about the Kellers,
Who did I make
Fred?
the check out to for the brick?
and Forrest. I know they went on their honeymoon together.
I've read that, I've got
They-
little
yeah.
notice.
Forrest told me that they went on their honeymoon. But I don't know if they got married on the same day, but I know they went on their honeymoon together.
According to the little announcement, my book states all of this stuff. I got the little cutouts, you know, people used to make announcements in the newspaper of all the social stuff. And one was an announcement of Forrest and Hazel getting married, and that they were going to honeymoon in West Virginia, and that Fred and Eva were going with them and would get married in West Virginia.
If I know if they got married or not. I know they were-
I'm guessing maybe she wasn't quite of age by Ohio law, and West Virginia had an earlier age. That's what I'm guessing.
That's not like it's going to be.
So how many people here are related to Carol in some way? So here's this many. Yeah, so every time we have a family, we're gonna take a condom. And Tootsies will probably outdo us all. So. Dave?
Just a point of interest maybe to some, but this farm here, where you're sitting, could have been built by one of the family. The Mortons had this way back, and I believe it's marked up there on the board, right there. And the house, of course, goes way back to 18,
Something you should.
whatever. But this barn,
Russell.
I don't know what year it was built, but you are on property of your ancestors in some
Okay.
form here.
I thought I saw the name Morton, and I thought it was the next property up. So I
Well, it could have
had
been all the
kind
way
of
to Grafton Road.
I had kind of wondered.
It could have been all the way to
Of course,
Grafton.
my grandfather was a carpenter, and I know he built a lot of structures around Brunswick, but this, that would have gone back a little further, I think.
Okay, any more questions for Carol? You wanna, oh, here we go, here's a question.
I got the sun in my eyes, anyhow, I need to move.
So currently we're newer residents, but we moved to Brunswick in 1993. And we've lived in all over the village since we moved to Brunswick. Any of your family have any of the farms in what is now a village subdivision?
So that would have been the Chapmans, right? Mostly, that's
And
the Chapmans.
Carpenters are over there on the back side.
Who else?
I don't know where you're talking about.
They're Old Mill Village.
Old Mill Village.
So,
That doesn't tell me anything.
so the Gersbacher farm was where Old Phoenix used to be on that
Look on
corner.
here, this is, I put Post-it notes on all the properties there.
So we should be able to see from here, from this map. So let's see here. Where's center? Okay, here's center 42 and 3. So, yep, carpenters, yep. So carpenter.
So where was the farmhouse?
Is
the house still there? They won't even back it.
None of them are there. You can see on this, on this old map, plastic, where is that one, that is what I'm
Okay, so we'll take like a 5-minute break. Anybody who wants to stay and talk with Carol can do so, and then we'll re-adjourn for our business meeting.